Hello guys, Tops here. Today I want to make a tier list about the backgrounds in Battle Brothers. And yeah, I want to rank them as follows. I have 4 tiers. S are the late game bros that are most of the time very expensive and you want to hire late game. Then there are mid and early game bros, A tier, that are fairly cheap but still pretty good, and you hire them mostly mid and early game. Then there's the B tier. These are bros that are kind of underwhelming, but can be very good if they high roll certain stats or they can have very good events for your company. So I only hire them for specific reasons or if I want to gamble. F bros are the trash bros that I basically never hire or only hire just as fodder to die, basically. And let's start. Adventurous Noble. Okay. These guys have very good combat stats. They have, I think, the highest base resolve and high bonus in melee defense and melee attack. They are very good late game, but they're very expensive. So I hire them late game a lot. They're a little bit gambly, but you cannot hire hedge knights every time. So, you know, good late game character. Anatomist. Okay. They have negative HP and fatigue, but good combat stats. They have bonus on good combat stats and resolve. So they can make a decent banner. They can have decent events, but they're fairly expensive. They cost you a lot of the time, a couple hundred gold, so not cheap for mid and early. They're kind of gamble bros, but not bad. Apprentice. I think this guy is the epitome of average. He has plus 10% XP gain, which is pretty nice. Again, this guy is kind of mid-early game bro, but most of the time gamble. If he has some decent stars or trades, he can be good. And plus 10% experience gain is pretty nice. Especially early. Okay, let's go. Assassins. Okay. You can only gain an assassin brother if you have a bastard brother. So the assassin is an event basically. You cannot hire him. These guys are nice for Fencer because they have high initiative and good combat stats. So Fencer and Decker Bros, I would put them into gamble. You know, because you have a bastard brother. It's not something you can just hire. The Southern Assassin. So the normal assassin that you can hire. He has a little bit lower stats, but is basically the same. A decent background for dodge builds, like Dagger Bros and Fencers. Can be not really good as a tank, I would say. Nimble tank. So can be, if they roll low, you're gonna cry, especially HP and fatigue, but they can be decent for the Fencer or the Nimble Dagger guy. But I basically never hire them. They're also very expensive. Barbarians. Right, Barbarians is... if you play the Barbarians, it's a background that you start with. I don't think you can hire these guys, if I'm not mistaken. But they have a lot of bonus on a lot of good stats, so they're pretty good. But I think you cannot hire them. I would say they are good mid and early, because they are kind of your starting bros, if you play the Barbarians. The Bastard, yeah, that guy. Pretty expensive, these guys. They can have higher combat stat, but also lower combat stat and negative resolve. So kind of gambly and kind of expensive. So if you want to gamble and you have nothing better to do, go for them. All right, Beast Slayer. Beast Slayer have bonuses on a lot of combat stats, so that's nice, but they're fairly expensive. They're kind of a decent background that is designed for a hybrid, so for a thrower duelist maybe. Again, can be good, but fairly expensive. So too expensive to just hire them casually early on. Not good enough for higher late game tier, but if you want to gamble for a hybrid, they're all right. The Beggar. A lowborn thief. Yeah. As you can see, guys, not very good. Not very good. A trash boo. Very cheap. I hire them if I need somebody who can carry a shield for a contract, and I don't give a fuck if they die. So, yeah. Trash bro. Belly dancer. You can get these guys from an event, basically. And I think they cost you a lot of money, and their stats are not that great for that money. So I would say trash. The Bowyer. The Bowyer is a range background who can craft you a famed bow if you're lucky. And I think if you're level 6, it can happen. It's an event, so they can be a little bit expensive. I would say they are a gambling brother for the event and a decent ranged guy for early mid game. The Brawler has a lot of base stats, a lot of plus in base stats. That's what I want to say. He can train other people. That's also nice. They are fairly cheap and have good combat stats. I hire these guys a lot early and mid game. They're very good for early and mid game. And the Butcher is like kind of the light version of the Brawler. Again, very good early and mid game, fairly cheap, but with decent bonuses to their stats. So again, good early and mid game. The Caravan Hand have, again, bonuses on combat stats, and they can have a great event. So, which gives you additional inventory space. So these guys, if they are cheap, they can be expensive a little bit. If they are cheap, I hire them early mid game for combat. But I would say I buy them for the event, and they're most of the time around 1,000 gold. So, or at least they're significantly more expensive than the Brawler or the Butcher, but not necessarily better. So I would say I only hire them for the event more or less, just to gamble. Next one, yeah, we have the Companions, who are your starting bros basically. You have the one-handed, two-handed, and the range guy. I put them all mid, early, because they are your starting bros. They have decent stats for the mid and early game, but fall off late. Okay, let's continue. The Converted Crusader. Only available during the Holy War. And I never got this guy, and it's hard to rank them because he has obviously good traits, good combat bonuses, but you only get him to an event, you cannot hire him, so I would say he's a gamble, right? The Cripple is, I think, the worst background in the game, but also one of the cheapest, so he can have 30 HP. He's just trash all the way through. Not much to say about him, just bad. The Crusader. Yeah, you can get them during the Undead Crisis, and he will leave when the undead craze is over. So I really don't like that. His melee defense is also not very high. He will be level 9, so that's something, but I got him one time, wasn't impressed, immediately dismissed him. He's also very expensive, so I will put that guy in the trash tier. Not worth his money. Okay, cultists. Cultists, okay. Fairly cheap, very high resolve bonus, and fatigue bonus as well. Can be decent in a banner, but they also might try to convert your bros, so that is a gamble, bro, in my opinion. Except if you do a cultist run, of course. It's one of your main guys, basically. Okay. The Daydailer is pretty average, but has a bonus in fatigue. So he's not bad, very cheap background, very good for gambling early on. If he has good stars, he can be alright. Let's go. Deserter. I don't like these guys because their resolve is so low that it's gonna be hard to fix, and they're fairly expensive, so yeah. And they have negative events, so these guys are just trash, in my opinion. I don't like these guys at all, never hire them. So the Disowned Noble is the weaker version of the Adventurous Noble. He has negative fatigue and resolve. But he can become a Regent of Absentia, so he get a lot of stats bonus. He can get a lot of stat bonuses. So he has a couple of bad traits excluded as well. So I would say it's a gamble, bro, because he's also fairly expensive. Can be good, but he will take his time. And that's the Regents of Absentia again. Yeah, the stats of the Regent of Absentia. That he can become. Okay. Right. This guy has one reason. You can cure the insecure trait from one of your brothers. So if you have a guy who is insecure, which is a very bad trait, but he's otherwise a good briar, you want to hire a eunuch to heal that, but otherwise just a trash bro. But I would say gamble, because it's also gamble. Let's say it's also for a specific reason. Gamble event specific. Also, let's say event. Yeah. Nah, let's say gamble / event. A classic event bro, I would say. Okay. Farmhand. These guys are very good. They can get really skill when they remember that they were farmhands. They are fairly cheap and they have a lot of bonuses to resolve and hit points. They're like brawlers, butchers, farmhands. Very good for the early and mid game. The fishermen. Very similar to the other backgrounds I mentioned. They have bonuses to a bunch of basic stats and are fairly cheap to get. And therefore, they're good mid-early game. Not too expensive with good bonuses. Right, the Flagellant. The Flagellant has bonus for fatigue and resolve, but low HP, which is very bad. And also have some events. So that guy, you can gamble on a bannerman on this guy because I have bonuses in fatigue and resolve. I almost never buy them, but I think they're a classic gamble background who can turn good eventually. Yeah, they can also get turned by a monk, which gives them a bunch of stats. So again, a gamble, a big gamble. And here we have the gambler. And the gambler has bonuses for melee defense, range defense, resolve, and initiative. So that guy is a decent nimble tank, or can be a decent nimble tank. And the gambler is of course a gamble. If he high rolls, can be a decent nimble tank, maybe a dagger assassin guy, but if not, he's just trash. Gladiators. Very strong, very expensive background. What I don't like, their fatigue and their HP are just average, but everything else is above average. So these guys are very nice. Very good for late game. They're very expensive, but worth their money. You buy a lot of combat power if you get them. Okay. Gravedigger. Well, the Gravedigger has some nice bonuses, and they are very cheap. Grave Rover and Gravediggers, very cheap. Good bonuses. They're a little bit rare sometimes, but I would say they are good for mid and early game. They can be amazing if they have stars in the right place. And bonuses to life, fatigue, resolve is pretty good in the early game. Grave Robber. He has also bonuses on a lot of stats. And these guys can, can have some nice events. They're fairly cheap most of the time. So if you see a cheap one, early mid game, you can buy them. Next one. My favorite, the Hedge Knight. The best background for pure Battleforge and probably also for Nimble. And my favorite background in the game. We all know him, we all love him. Some hate them, but I don't know why. They're just the best, most expensive, and I hate it when they low roll. But nonetheless, best background late game in my opinion. Historia. Negative stats, but I think they can have some decent event and they can have experience gains. So these guys, if you are kind of an event guy and you want to gamble, I would say kind of gambly, if not trash. No, I would say trash. Their stats are just way too low, in my opinion. Oh, the Houndmaster is next. Houndmaster, they have bonuses to a lot of stats, which is good. And, he can have some War Dog specific stuff, which doesn't do much, but again, here's bonuses to a lot of stats. So if you find them cheap, they're good mid and early game. Bonuses to melee defense is very nice. Okay, here we have the Hunter. The Hunter is the best range background in the game, but he's also very expensive. He costs around 1,000 gold. So I would say late game. You can argue that you can buy him earlier in the mid and early game, but I would say even a late game, you want to buy a Hunter if you want to buy range guys or get good archers, you need to buy the Hunter. So I would say late game, you can argue mid and early game again. We all know this guy. Most bonus to range skill. Let's go. Indebted. Yes. These guys. Barbarian indebted, Southern indebted. Yeah, these guys. There's an Manhunter origin, and I think they're kind of designed for that. These guys are never worth it. Never. I wouldn't buy them. They don't cost you anything, but they are just trash bros. And if you don't play Indebted, yeah, they're just trash. So if you need a guy with a shield for one fight, okay, take them, but otherwise I wouldn't buy them. Juggler, +5 chance to hit the head, so that's something. Negative HP is bad, but bonuses to initiative. That means these guys can be okay for Nimble Tank, but yeah, just okay at best. Can be okay dagger guy, but I would buy a thief instead, so I would kind of say trash. Killer on the run. These guys, I really like these guys because they have a +10% hit chance and bonuses to initiative. They have negative resolve, which is a little bit bad, but these guys can be amazing nimble tanks if you find them. They're pretty rare to find, but these guys can be decent nimble tanks if they high roll melee defense. So I would say gambly, very gambly, but can be good. Kingsguard is another event that I actually never had. So they have a lot of bonus stats, but again, it's an event, so do I put them in trash tier? I'd say gamble event because it's like you get them from an event, right? All right, next one, Lindworm Slayer. I got this guy a couple of times. You get them through an event. And I was always disappointed with them because they're very expensive and they have a nice famed Lindworm armor, but except from that, they have nothing much else. Not much else. They're kind of mediocre and very expensive for that. So I would say pretty gambly. Most of the time I bought them, kept the armor and dismissed them. But just for the armor, it's also an event. So yeah, just for the armor, pretty good, I would say. Okay, Lumberjacks. Lumberjacks are fairly expensive. A lot of the time they cost you a couple of hundred because they come with an X, but they have a lot of bonuses to nice early and mid game stats, also combat stats. So these guys are very nice if you find them fairly cheaply early mid game. The Manhunters. They have bonuses to a lot of combat stats. But they are sometimes a little bit expensive. So if you find a Manhunter fairly cheap in the mid and early game, they're good for that. That's what I would say. But they can be expensive, depending on the equipment. All right. The Mason has bonus to fatigue, which is nice. I rarely buy these guys, but again, if they roll high, they can be good. I would put them into gamble. Can be good mid early game, but you know, there are other backgrounds like the Butcher, for instance, or the Farmint, which are just better. Okay, the Messenger has a lot of bonuses to fatigue and defense, which is pretty good. So I would say they're decent for mid and early game. I buy them sometimes mid early game. Okay, one of my favorite backgrounds mid and early. Some backgrounds that I always recommend because they just have a lot of benefits on all the nice stats. The Militia is very good mid and early game. If you see them they can be expensive, but if you see a cheap Militia, I would always buy them mid and early game because these guys can be amazing if they high roll. Okay. The Miller. I rarely buy them, but they have good bonuses to hit points and fatigue. So can be good if they high roll, but most of the time farmhands, butcher, brawler, fishermen are just better. But they can be good. Same with the miner. Has bonuses to life and melee skill and resolve, but negative fatigue. So he can dig up 2 gems, so he has a good event as well. He's fairly cheap, so I would say he's a gambler. If he high rolls, he can be pretty good mid and early. Not bad at all. Okay, the minstrel. Yeah, these guys, I don't know. Yeah, I don't like these guys. Negative fatigue and hit points is bad. So I basically never buy them. I would say they are trash. Maybe if you want one of these events, you kinda just buy them for an event, maybe. But I don't like them. Monk. Okay, monks are pretty good because they can have very high resolve. So can be a decent early mid-game banner, but they have a lot of good events. And these guys are one of these guys that you most of the time just buy for an event. So I would say buy them for an event, or if you want to gamble on a cheap bannerman. The pacified flagellant. I think this is the flagellant that got cured by a monk. I would say, again, event thing. It's not even here on the list. So a gamble event thing. Okay, let's go. The melee nomad has a lot of bonuses to fighting stats, but not much else. These guys are fairly expensive. And yes, I don't like them that much. They can be good, but their hit points is normal, the resolve negative, fatigue a little bit better on average, but they are very expensive. But if you'd see a cheap nomad, you should buy them, maybe. So I would say same with the ranged nomad, which is decent for ranged and melee. Again, decent for hybrids. If you can't find one of these expensive late game boys and none of these guys, you can gamble on one of these guys, I would say, but I don't buy them often. Okay, Oath Taker. Love-hate relationship with Oath Takers because they have excluded hit points. This background is kind of designed for a nimble dodge build, but they can never have a lot of hit points because they have no stars. So you can never have a great nimble Oath Taker. You can have a good one, but never a great one. Their combat stats are amazing, but they have negative fatigue and rage defense, so they are not suited for Battleforge, in my opinion, most of the times. And but if you want a fencer and these guys high roll, they might be okay for a fencer. Can be great fencers. So I would say they are gambly, very gambly. I would say it's one of these late game characters that you might want to gamble on. Late game, when you have more than enough money and you just want to hire god bros. So, yeah. I think just because of the fact that they are so expensive, they're kind of a late game character. You don't gamble on these guys early on, unless you are very desperate and you need to win. Okay, Orc Slayer. Same as the Crusader. You gain them and during a crisis, and then they leave the company. I hate that, so they're trashed here. You can hire them and maybe you are lucky, but they will leave the company, so who cares? Next one. This is a very interesting character. The Peddler has negative melee defense, so not a good combat guy, but he has bonuses to melee and range defense and initiative. So that guy is, in my opinion, a good gambler. If these guys high roll melee or range defense or initiative, they make excellent nimble tanks and they are very cheap. So very good to gamble on a nimble tank if you need one. Okay, next one. The Pimp. Yeah. The Pimp is kind of the light version of the Peddler, a little bit a better version of the Peddler, but you only get him through an event, so he's pretty rare. But again, if that guy high rolls, he can be a good nimble tank, but again, he's a gamble event brother. Next one, Poacher. Okay, the Poacher is a range background, so are they Gamble brothers? Kind of, right? But I would say they're decent mid-early game if you want to have range guys mid and early game and you cannot find or afford a hunter. So I would say decent mid-early game for your range guys. Okay, let's continue. The Raider. I hate these guys. They can have, as you see, decent stats, but they have a lot of bad events. They are fairly expensive as well. So, and these events are pretty bad. He has a lot of bad events. So that guy, and he's expensive. So I rather buy an Adventurous Noble, because for the same price you get Adventurous Noble. So he's not worth his money, in my opinion. So I put him in the trash tier. Again, if you high roll on him, he can be amazing, but this is basically for all brothers. And the specific point that I make here, he's too expensive for what you get for. You basically pay for problems down the line and you pay a lot of money for that. Just buy an Adventurous Noble and be happy. That's my statement to that guy. Okay. Ratcatcher. Negative hit points but high initiative. So these guys can be, again, decent for early mid-game nimble tanks or dagger initiative builds. So I would put them into gamble event, you know. If they high roll, they can be decent. So kind of gambly, but again, okay, that guy. Yes, the Refugee has a bunch of events that I don't care about. And negative hit points and resolve are not worth it. So I would say that guy is trash. You buy them early on if they are cheap. They are very cheap. But most of the time you just have trouble with them and they're gonna die anyways because you don't have a lot of hit points. Okay, Retired Soldier. They have, it's kind of the light version of the Swordmaster. They have negative fatigue and hit points, but good combat stats. But they're expensive. So these guys, I never buy them, cannot recommend them. They are just trash. Too expensive for what they offer, in my opinion. Okay, Sellswords. Have a lot of bonuses to combat stats and bunch of events, but I think they can get greedy and ask for higher pay, and they're very expensive. So they also can straight up leave the company, if I'm not mistaken. So they are similar to the Raider. They can have good stats, but they are the same price as an Adventurous Noble, and I would rather buy an Adventurous Noble. But they are decent for hybrids, so if you dare or you have no other option, you can gamble on them. They're decent. But there's a lot of problems they can produce, so be aware. The Servant is one of these guys that I basically never buy, but yeah, not much to say. One of these trash bros with negative stats, but again, very, very cheap. The Shepherd is kind of like the Red Catcher, not the Red Catcher, like the Poacher, an early range guy, in my opinion. So you can gamble on these mid and early game if you want to. Are they good mid and early? Yes. Yeah, I would say I have the Hunter for late game and these guys for mid early game, but most of the times I even would went for the Archer mid and early game if you can, and only buy these if you can't find a Hunter. So that's what I would say to them. But they're not bad. Not bad. Okay, the Squire. They have a lot of stats and they can gain stats, but they're very expensive. So, very expensive. I would rather buy an Adventurous Noble. So I would say pretty gambly, can be decent, but most of the time just buy an Adventurous Noble. You're gonna be more happy. Okay, Swordmaster. These backgrounds are just crazy, in my opinion. Probably the craziest backgrounds in the game. Negative HP and fatigue, but the highest combat stats. So these guys, you can recruit them and they can have 30 plus melee skill, melee defense and 90 plus melee skill right off the rip. So I would say they can be cheap, roughly 3k. That's expensive, but these guys can carry your mid game if you are struggling. You can't fight good bros. You need somebody to carry your team, but you have no time and you can't find these. If you find a cheap Swordmaster, he can carry your team. So I would say it's decent mid-early game for your company to carry you to late game and maybe even through the late game crisis. After that, I don't buy them. Soon if I have a very good company. Okay. The Tailor is a bro who has negative stats or can have negative stats, and he can do some events. Not very big on them, but they are very cheap. So again, cheap food brothers for the early game if you just need to sacrifice a couple of bros. Thieves. I like these guys. They have the highest melee defense from the lowborns and also bonuses to resolve and initiative. So these guys, in my opinion, are the best background for early initiative and nimble tank builds. So basically any thief can become a nimble tank. I would highly recommend them mid and early game. They are not too expensive and they can be very good. Okay, the Vagabond. Yeah. Has a bunch of events, negative stats, but bonuses to fatigue, so yeah, but negative resolve and the hit points, so yeah, very gambly, very gambly. But bonuses to fatigue is always nice, can be decent if you want to gamble early mid, but you rather would buy any of the other A tiers. So it's probably a trash guy, the Wildman. Okay, the Wildman. I think there's no more gambly guy than the Wildman. And he also has minus 15 XP gain. So these guys are just, yeah, I don't know. If you just want somebody early who can do some shit, I don't like them. But if they high roll, they can be okay. Because they have insane bonuses to hit points, fatigue, and resolve. I think they have the highest possible base resolve in the game. So, very gambly, but can be decent. The Witch Hunter have a high bonus to range skill and a very low tolerance. So they always have high range skill, so to speak, and always high resolve. Very good. Also, yeah, that good trade. They can be good for banners and also good for hybrids, but they are roughly 1k or a little bit more most of the time. So they come with a crossbow. They are decent to gamble on and decent for hybrids. But I would say they are too expensive to gamble on early, but overall decent for hybrids, like the sellsword. But militias can also be good hybrids, so, you know, decent for a bannerman. Again, pretty gambly, but not a bad background after all. And I think that guy is the monk that, the cultist that got returned by the monk. So, yeah, same, pretty gambly, pretty event heavy. So, if you want to have him, that's what I put him in. Okay, let's look at our tier list. All these guys are pretty expensive, and they can be bad if they low roll. So I only gamble late game on these guys if I just need S tier bros or God bros. Because if these guys high roll, they are better than everybody else. So can be gambly, but they are guaranteed expensive. But kind of that's what it is about. Late game, you have a lot of money, not a lot of time to gamble on cheap bros that might be decent if they get a lot of levels. You basically buy the elite bros. These guys are for mid and early game. They carry your mid and early game, fall off late game. But if they roll high, they can reach late game and still be in your late game roster. All of these guys are pretty gambly, or only gain through an event, or you only buy them for an event. That's what I would say to them, roughly. And all of these guys are just the trash bros that you hire if you need a guy with a shield. And it's a tough fight, you know. Somebody will die and is your beggar or your cripple and not your brawler or your militia or your nice farmhand. Somebody needs to die sometimes. That's why you hire them. Yeah, I think this is it. This is my tier list. If you have a different opinion, please write it down in the comments. That's what I would rank them. It's a little bit, it's not an overall approach. So you could argue that somebody like a brawler or farmhand is overall less S tier. But I kind of wanted to differentiate it to mid, early, late game, pretty gambly, and just straight up trash. Again, tell me in the comments if you like that or not. What is your opinion on my tier list? And thank you guys so much for watching. I'm gonna see you in the next video. Have a nice day. Bye bye.